This is Phil Lamar, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
On a private jet in 1973, Mama had a little party, ended up having me. She loved her job, never was gonna quit.
Hello and welcome to the Comic Concierge Podcast, a podcast that believes that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. This is another one of my Comic Concierge podcasts where I bring someone on, I recommend a book to them, and we discuss it. Today's podcast, we have a special guest, Jay Soderberg, aka PodVader. Thanks, man, for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time and reading Kill Them All, which we'll be getting to in a moment. But before we get to that, I thought we'd get a little spiel of who you are and kind of people want to listen or hear more for you, how they could do that.
Sure. So I sort of play two roles. I'm the vice president of content at Vox Nest. So I represent the company, but I'm also a podcaster and have my own NFL talk show called Next Fan Up. So you can listen to me there.
If I remember correctly, you are a Patriots fan. Am I right?
No, I'm not just a Patriots fan. I believe I am the biggest Patriots fan.
Man, I gotta say, so I'm a Giants fan, and it's been a tough year.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's been. I know. But I was rooting for the Patriots this Super Bowl. I'm not gonna lie. Well, partially because being a Giants fan, I wanted us to be the only team that ever beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. But also because I hate the Eagles. But it was like the worst year possible for a Giants fan.
Well, it's funny, going into the Super Bowl, I was having an argument with my father-in-law, who is also, unfortunately, a Giants fan. And I asked him, well, what team could you root for? I mean, are you rooting for the Patriots or are you rooting for the Eagles? What could Giants fans do in that particular scenario? It's like we own the Patriots in the Super Bowls, but we hate the Eagles. And I said, I guarantee more Giants fans are rooting for Patriots than Eagles.
Yeah, we actually had an argument with my wife too, because she's like, "No, she doesn't want to root for the Patriots ever." But I'm like, I can't. It's against my DNA to root for the Eagles, no matter what the situation is. So.
Yeah, see, it's just like me with the Jets, and I usually extend that a little bit to the Colts and the Steelers, but now I just feel sorry for everyone because
yeah, it's hard to hate the Jets because it's like they just do it to themselves. It's like hating the Browns. It's like, can you really? You just kind of feel bad for them. But outside of that, I do know, getting into this, you do have some background with comics. Currently, are you reading anything currently? Did you read stuff in the past? Have you stepped away from it? What is your history with comics?
So I read. My history with comics is really one of those on again, off again sort of relationships. So back when I was a kid, just a little tyke. I really got into comics thanks to the Transformers, cars turning into fighting robots.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a winning combination. So I used to read a lot of Transformer comic books. And then my stepfather, who saw that I was reading comic books the Transformer comic books were not, they were fine for a 10-year-old. But then he tried to introduce me to the X-Men. And I'm so disappointed that I never got into it because I was like, this artwork is crappy. Get this thing away from me. This looks lousy. What are these stories? These are way too I, of course, learned later on that I was going to really regret that decision. But as I got a little bit older and in high school and right before college, I really started getting into a lot of the Marvel stuff. Probably thanks to the guys who ended up leaving and going to Image Comics. So I was getting into Spider-Man and the X-Men again by Chris Claremont on the X-Men. And it really sucks because my stepfather had some of those original Chris Claremont stories. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I just threw them away. It was just, so disheartening.
Man.
But it's been a long curve. And then I was really into comics through college. And then after college, I got out of it and then had kids of my own and got back into comics. And our library has a great system where you can check out big graphic novels, and read a lot of the Tim Sale Batman stuff.
Nice.
All through college, Frank Miller. Really love Frank Miller and the Sin City series and the Dark Knight Returns. I had a buddy who got me into Preacher and Transmetropolitan, The Watchmen. So I've read a lot. I've read quite a bit of comics. And these days, again, it's sort of like, oh, that looks interesting. but the way the companies these days are renewing the storylines, it almost seems like every other year it's like, oh, we're gonna change the canon.
Yeah.
It's hard to follow.
Yeah. Right now Marvel's doing a new fresh start already, though I would say going through some of the books actually been quite good. But yeah, I was similar, where I had a big break after college until adulthood because of obviously the price. But as you mentioned, the library has also been a huge benefit because you can get a lot of great books, especially now that there's a lot of free digital services as well, which has been a huge key. But that brings us to the book that we're talking about today with Kill Them All. And, the reason I think I recommended this book is because I know you talked about some of the things that you do enjoy, some of the comedy, and especially some of the more action based. And I felt like this is really, in a way, like a love letter to 80s and 90s action films. It's almost like Naked Gun-esque in a way, done by Kyle Starks. He's got a very unique style. So I was curious because this is a little bit different than some of the books you're talking about. Obviously different than Watchmen and Dark Knight, a little bit more goofy in that sense. But how much did you enjoy Kill Them All?
Oh, I loved it. And when you talk about that throwback to those 80s and 90s action flicks, one of the things that it really reminded me of was that same college friend of mine, Jeb, who got me into the Watchmen and those types of comics, also got me into John Woo action movies. And this very much reminded me of the John Woo action movies from Hong Kong, and Hard Boiled especially. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. And the dialogue is so spot on and so witty and funny, with a lot of themes that I think, I think this came out 3 years ago that really fit with some of the things that are happening today.
Yeah, it came out, I think 2 years ago. I think was when it was officially published. It was published as a complete original graphic novel. And it was one of Kyle Starks' is really his second biggest project. He had a book before this called Sex Castle, which is around the same vein, but this is really where I first noticed him. And it's funny that you mentioned John Woo. It is like a John Woo and like a Bruce Willis / Sylvester Stallone movie kind of combined into one. The dialogue is a good point. Just what I found really hilarious regarding this is just how seriously all the characters are taking it. Where it feels like they're not in on the joke. Like this is to them. It is comedic, but how straightforward they are, like almost like similar to like Leslie Nielsen and Naked Gun, or the Airplane, how he would not until the later films when he started getting in on the joke, like he took it straight, and it's where the comedy kind of ensued because of all the craziness around him.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, you see the ex-cop sort of sitting on his couch drinking and watching educational television, which is just, just that thought alone is just funny. It's like, oh, yep, that's a meme that definitely happens in every single movie.
And I just love like some of the way when they did go really far with it, like how he had what he called it his carcinal, where he just keeps all of his weapons and everything. Actually reminded me of, is it I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, that they have that scene with the one guy putting all the different guns on him, and it goes on forever till eventually like he ends up like falling and killing himself. It reminded me of that, just the quick access and the like unlimited arsenal like all these characters seem to have for some reason.
My favorite scene in the book was he's got his two gold-plated pistols, and they're pinned down in a stairwell, and he throws one pistol in the air, shoots at it so that it ricochets off of the pistol and kills the guy that's shooting at him with a machine gun. That's just brilliant. I actually want to see that done in a live action movie at some point, because that's just brilliant.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the themes that this one after was going at was very similar to things today. I was curious if you wanted to expand on that further.
Yeah, so the female character is an assassin who ends up getting fired because she dumps her assassin boyfriend. And I saw a lot of the Me Too sort of theme running through this in female empowerment, especially with that character, and how the main bad guy sort of discounted her. Oh, yeah, I know I trained her ever since she was a young child, but she's not going to succeed in all of this. And, I guess spoiler alert, she succeeds.
Yeah. It's funny because when I first read that, I didn't pick it up. That's a good point. How, it is like she's dealing with a lot of kind of incompetence. I mean, the main character, or the other main character, is obviously like, he can shoot bullets off a gun, so he knows what he's doing, but just how she's obviously, fighting it back against that stereotype that she's put in. And the fact that much of her arc is built upon just having like the worst boyfriend ever, and it just how it goes from them breaking up to kung fu battle. It just like right into it very quickly. It's like we're not wasting any time. We're going to go straight forward, and it is somewhat unrelenting. We do get a couple flashback scenes here and there. I was curious if it ever became like too much, because this is a relatively longer book, and with a book like this that is really amped up, did it ever get to a point where you felt like it could have maybe stepped back, or you felt like you were just going with it the whole way?
Oh no, I thought the story flowed fairly well. I always have a problem with flashbacks. They sometimes will drive me nuts if you do too many of them, but I didn't think there were that many flashbacks. And there does come a point where there are no more flashbacks, which is good. It's sort of like you get the flashbacks early on, and then it literally might even be like halfway through the book there's no more flashbacks.
Yeah.
It's all moving forward. So in that sense, I felt pretty comfortable with it. And you mentioned the themes going on too about the female character and the Liam Neeson-ness of the main male character, or protagonist at least. Again, very similar. She's the smartest person in the book. Like all the men in this story are pretty dumb. Even there's a female bad guy who ends up being even smarter than the rest of the men. So definitely the female characters are portrayed in a very positive light all throughout the story, whereas the male characters are sort of portrayed as big dumb jocks almost.
Yeah, very egotistical, and especially like the main villain, who I got for some reason, I don't know if it was just the hair or the face look, but I just like I imagine Jeff Goldblum taking that character. His mannerisms weren't that much like it, but like his overall design, just for some reason I just couldn't get that out of my head. Maybe it's just from his Guardians role, I just can't get enough Jeff Goldblum, I guess. I don't know.
It is fitting. I mean, he's got the mullet for days, the bad guy character, but there's also a very Asian flavor to all the characters, obviously, well, because they all have Asian names, and they all tend to have a little bit of an Asian look to them in the artwork. But that slicked back mullet is very prototypical of the triad gang leader.
Yeah. And I thought, you mentioned the artwork, and I was curious about that, because it's a very cartoony style in a sense, and how that worked for you. Because I know for some it may not, or I'm obviously you like the book, so I'm guessing the art for you was effective in that sense, and especially when it comes to, this is a very action heavy book, and how well the action flowed in the sense of, did it have that John Woo-esque feeling to you, and especially in the way like you have some of those gigantic, really over the top action sequences.
Well, honestly, if there is a negative to the book, it is the artwork. It's very simplistic. I almost relate it to a newspaper comic.
Yeah.
It's got that kind of art flow to it. I mean, it works to the degree that it needed to, but I think overall, I think the story is what ends up driving my liking of this particular book. But certainly the art isn't one that I would be like, oh, you got to check out this book, because the art in this is just fantastic.
Yeah.
This is definitely more of a story driven comic book than an art driven comic book.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think what the art was effective in, at least for me, was in the sense of it definitely fit this story. Like if you had, say, like a Jim Lee speaking about X-Men trying to do the style, it would, I think, be too much like the actual thing it's parodying. So I don't know if it worked. Maybe it could, but having the more cartoony aspect of it, having like limbs that go in directions that I don't think limbs can actually go, and overextending them, I thought it was effective in that manner. But it is, like you said, it's very straightforward style in the sense that there's not a huge amount of detail. It's very cartoony. And it's almost like you mentioned, like the Sunday morning cartoon, or like a like Adult Swim, some of the Adult Swim cartoons where it's not really about having highly detailed, accurate art. It's about just being able to portray the story you're trying to do in an effective manner.
Yeah, Jim Lee would be definitely a little too over stylized.
Yeah.
However, I think you could take like a Rob Liefeld
Yeah.
and put his artwork in this story, and I think it would fit the story. Something that's, you know, Rob's art isn't cartoony, but it's also skewed enough where it's not cartoon. Again, it's not cartoony, but it's a little different. You know, it's you can tell that you're looking at a comic book, where Jim Lee can actually. By the way, Jim Lee is probably my favorite artist.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Jim Lee's stuff is definitely it wouldn't fit in this particular story, but I think Rob Liefeld's could. And Eric Larson does a lot of, at least back in the day, did a lot of comedy type books. His style might work.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Kyle Starks, who does this book, also has another series called Rock Candy Mountain, where it's not action driven. It's more of a fantasy story that takes place during the Great Depression, and it's about like hobo lifestyle and deals with, it's like an American folklore story. So I don't know necessarily if that would work for you as well, because it's not really taking much of the action beat. The sense of the humor is very, very similar, but it's definitely a different approach with the story, because it's much more fantasy based, and it's not as parody heavy as something like this.
I went to Kyle Stark's website, kylestarks.com, and he's got a little preview for Punch Captain, and it's very similar. The dialogue is very similar to what he has in Kill 'Em All, and I chuckle every time, because it's very funny. It's like his C is not his C is his fists, and they will and they like to punch, and there will be more punching. Again, going back to those John Woo movies where you have to read, there's obviously a translation, and when you read it, the dialogue is very similar. It's very short, choppy English that just sort of, it's probably inappropriate to laugh at, but at the same time, it comes off as very funny. And suppose, I mean, they are translating directly from the language. So if in that particular language, if all they do is say, I will punch you once, and then I will punch you a second time in the face, and then I will punch you a third time in the face, that repetitive sort of kung fu dialogue is, I always laugh when I hear it.
Yeah, it's very, they're not hiding back. They're not utilizing metaphors all that much. Either it's an extreme metaphor, or it's just straightforward, this is what I'm going to do, and then they do it kind of thing. I think you do make a good point too regarding Kyle Starks, who does this. It's certainly he has, I think, a huge understanding, and it comes from a place of love and admiration for much of this that he's parroting. And I think because of that, he can kind of hit pieces of that type of genre and style that someone who's just kind of using it and not as knowledgeable maybe not be able to pick up. Like, there are, I think, a lot of great little smaller moments and beats where it's just kind of taking that genre and subverting it here and there. Like we mentioned with the main female character, the use of flashbacks, especially just in the way the action flows. I really loved, for example, the one sequence where she's going through, like, the big thing they're going to try to stop her with is, like, there's that use of cake and Tammy, and how she becomes like this, like, huge foe. And I just thought, that's always the case, right? There's always, like, how they stop way too soon in the elevator, and they have to face all these different villains, and just the varying degree of people, and how this is actually still kind of operates as a regular office, even though it's full of supervillains.
Right. Yes, that's that particular part of the story, I think, is quite enjoyable, where they literally have to fight through floors of employees who all have desk jobs, but they're all actually supervillains and assassins. The theme works extremely well. Like, I can't believe you ate that cake, I'm going to tell on you. Punch in the face. It's just, pretty good. Yeah. Another thing is when Iruka, I guess that's how you say his name, or Mason, that's his first name, easier to say, decides before he gets into the whole killing spree in the office building, he's so down on himself, he's going to a fight club, and he gets introduced as Overcop, and the guy, he's like, Overcop, what? And he's like, well, you're always overcompensating, and you're a cop. That's just, it's fantastic because it's exactly how their names usually get made up in all of these old Hong Kong style movies.
Yeah.
And then he suggests that he should call him Grasshopper. Again, just making a pun off of a different name. It's that puns will get me every time.
This is a very punerific book for sure. There's
Yes.
a lot. I do like that regarding that scene too, how he wins the fight, and then like there's that line. It's like, you always do this. This is how you win all your fights. It's like he seems to just go for the man bags as they called it, which is like, a true hero, of course, and how the leader of that underground fighting ring, very much I would assume he's like walking right out of like a John Carpenter movie or something like that. He's got that really over the top, huge headdress look to him. But yeah, it's really touching, like you said, really touching upon a lot of those different Hong Kong tropes, along with like the classic 80s and 90s action aspects that you would see in a lot of those movies.
It's really great. And then of course the female assassin, as she's going through the building, runs into the Kill Bill evil supervillain. So there's another female named Praying Mantis, and I forget the other one that she runs into, that they actually don't end up killing each other because they have too much of a respect for each other.
Yeah. It was quite good. Was there anything else specifically you wanted to bring up regarding Kill Them All?
No, I mean, it's a fun book. It's definitely one of those, as we mentioned, if you're into those 80s classic action flicks, you're going to like reading this book. It has a lot of those tropes and a lot of those memes, and it's done so in a very intelligent manner. So highly recommend it.
Very good. I'm glad you enjoy it, definitely. And the other piece I'd like to do is, based upon your reaction to this, think of where's in your other history with books, thinking of what else is out there currently that you might like. And I know you mentioned being a fan of a lot of the 90s books, like a Rob Liefeld, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but a lot of his like 90s image properties are now, I know everything's getting rebooted, but like Youngblood and Cyberforce, Image is trying to bring them back for a new age. So if you're looking to get a little bit, he's not writing or drawing them, so if you're really like his art style, but he is overseeing their creation. He's done a lot of covers. For example, one of the recent comics, he did a variant where he created a new character called Pouch Man. And it's just legitimately a dude with a bunch of pouches. So he's very much, with the one thing I do love about Liefeld, he very much is in on his own jokes. So if you're looking to kind of getting a little of the 90s flavor, because Jim Lee like does a comic every 5 years now, and there are a lot of relaunches and stuff like that. But if you really like Batman Returns, a really great Batman book that is just ended was Batman White Knight, and it very much, it's like a combination of Tim Burton, the 90s cartoon, regular Batman, takes place in like a Elseworld universe where Batman and like the Joker end up somewhat switching places in a way, not all the way, but the premise of it is Joker is cured and he then tries to set out and be better than Batman, and it kind of goes from there. But it's done by Sean Murphy, and who's a great artist. He writes it and draws it, and it's fantastic. It should be coming out in trade soon, but if you're looking for like one of the better Batman stories that recently came out, I think that's one that I think is a high recommend for me.
See, now when you said that Rob is rebooting some of his old characters and he's not writing or drawing them, I was like, oh, that's an improvement.
Yeah.
So I'm not the biggest fan of Rob. I love McFarlane.
Yeah.
I haven't read Spawn in ages, so I don't know what's going on in the Spawn universe. And honestly, Image was great when it first launched, but I think they all got sort of caught up. Mark Silvestri has a very Jim Lee-esque style. That I think they all got caught up in their own press, and Todd has probably made more money from his toy line than from
yeah.
his comic books at this point.
Yeah, and now they're coming out with another Spawn movie, so there's that too. So yeah, he I can't remember the last time he's drawn. A lot of the Image founders, they really don't do much in the sense of comics, like creating comics, like specifically writing or drawing them. They're mostly overseeing, except for the guy who made Savage Dragon. That's still coming out full force, and he's still doing that. So outside of that, Jim Lee is mostly with DC now. Rob Liefeld has kind of got his own thing. He does work with Image here and there, but it's really the new people that it's really changed. Like Image has changed a lot. They Kyle Sarks, who wrote his new series, Rock Candy Mountain, actually came out through Image. And you still have Robert Kirkman putting out books, but it's Image now is more for, I think, the place for, they have a lot of horror books, supernatural fantasy stories, and just like general drama series. It's hard to actually find a book that's just a straight human drama anymore. It's often, there's always like a supernatural spin to it, but outside of like a Jeff Lemire book here and there.
Yeah, and you mentioned Kirkman. I am a big Walking Dead fan, and I actually I found The Walking Dead through the TV show first, and then I did go back and read the comics, and I'm all caught up through the comics. So I have an idea of where the TV show is going, although it appears the TV show is going in a much different direction now as they have done some things. I don't know how spoilerific I can get on the show, but I'll just say the TV show is taking a turn that is much different than the comic books, and it sounds like with with perhaps their main character on the TV show about to leave the program, they're really going to take a turn that's different than the books. But
I feel like if you're in Walking Dead, you know what you're talking, or if you're watching the show. I actually stopped watching the show. I got rid of cable, so I don't have access to it. So I have to catch up on Netflix or something.
Well, again, with The Walking Dead, what made The Walking Dead, the TV show, so great, and part of what made the comic great too, was you have an instance where your main character wakes up from a coma, the apocalypse has happened, he has no idea where his family is. When he does finally find his family, his wife is being taken care of by his best friend, ex-cop partner, whom he now doesn't know if he can trust or not. His wife is pregnant, don't know if the kid is his or not. Could be his best buddy's kid at this point because they all thought he was dead. His son is sort of dealing with all of this. And then when she finally has the baby, the son actually has to kill his mom for the birth of it's just, I mean, that sort of drama was just awesome.
Yeah.
And they sort of moved away from the drama and focused more on, all right, how can we make the next zombie look grosser? How can we make the killing and the action, make this more action packed? And that's not what made the show great. Like, yeah, there were zombies and there's, other factions of humans that we have to fight against. But, in the end, it's about the human relationship and how do you take certain aspects of the human relationship and put them into an apocalyptic sort of background. Like the way we would deal with the birth of a child nowadays, in a nice normal atmosphere is going to be that much different than dealing with the birth of a child in the apocalypse.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think it got to a point where I stopped watching, where it was just like it felt very much too aware of itself, where like a lot of the cliffhangers felt like they weren't there for story purposes. They were there to kind of drive up ratings, but then they would kind of go back and like, no, that person isn't dead. They kind of fell into the trappings that, kind of some comics often do, unfortunately. And that kind of drove me away a little bit. But you mentioned Robert Kirkman, and he actually did start a new book recently too called Oblivion Song, which is it's a little bit different. It's of course it's still dealing with like kind of apocalypse in a sense, but instead of it being the entire world, just like Philadelphia got like thrown into this like other dimension, and it takes place a decade after that first happened, where you have the main character that his job is like going into this dimension to kind of rescue people, but he's discovering that people are becoming less and less interested in having people go back because it's been such a big long period of time. Most want to move on, but his brother was one that was lost, so he's still trying to find him. But it's only, I think, 3 issues in so far. It's pretty good. I don't know if it'll have the same type of staying power of something like Walking Dead, but it's and it's not the character drama in that sense isn't like there's not as much going on because the focal point is really just the one main character. But it's the benefit of it too is that the first volume is actually completely written, because the other issue with Image books is that you'll get like 6 issues and then the next issue will come out like a year later, because being more creator owned. But I enjoy it. If you might want to try that, it's the first volume probably won't be out for a little bit, but I don't think they'll be making a TV show out of it. They might, knowing that he has that deal with I think it's Amazon, but it would probably be a little bit more expensive because of the fact like the creatures in that are like these gigantic like alien like monster creatures. They're like really deformed looking beasts in a way almost like demon-esque. So it's him, I think, trying something different, but still kind of staying within the wheelhouse that for him.
Well, another one that you had recommended to me, Invincible, I actually did start to read a little bit of it.
Nice.
And again, I assume it's tongue in cheek about the naming of characters, but at the same time, so many comic books now are doing it. It's like the kid hears Invincible, so he decides to call himself Invincible. It's like, it's a little too on the nose, one character's name is Robot because he's a robot. Like, Rexplode.
Yeah.
Some of these are a little bit too on the nose for me, and it's like I'm guessing it's supposed to be tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I'm like, no, you got to be a little bit more creative for me than that. Like that's just not going to get me excited. But we'll see. I'm enjoying it so far. I've read a couple of chapters, so I'm looking forward to seeing where this story goes. Where a young teenager discovers he's got superpowers.
That's a book, I think, because that's like Robert Kirkman, I think, really finding himself. Where it does. I think it gets off to a little bit of a rocky start, and like eventually, that's when I was a little bit hesitant because I think I even mentioned that like it takes a little bit for him to kind of like find his footing with that. That just recently ended. It went on for like 10 years. But I think what became interesting about that book is that unlike a lot of other superhero books, is that these characters actually aged with the time, and they actually, you saw like it was unaffected by anything else. It was its own story. So there was like an element of maturing that you don't really get with a normal superhero book, which helped really make it different. Especially, I can't remember what volume it is, but a lot of what's set up at the beginning ends up being completely subverted, I think that's really it starts getting kicked off. I think that's like volume 3. I can't remember off the top of my head because I read it all. A lot of it's available on Comixology Unlimited, so I kind of read it back to back, like the first 4 or 5 volumes. But it to me, it got better as it went. I'm not caught up with that at all, but it definitely it's not as strong as out the gate as Walking Dead was. Like where Walking Dead's first issue, it really, I think, launched Kirkman into something else. Invincible took a little bit of time to really find its footing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big stickler for timeline in any sort of storytelling. And I'm a big fan of the Star Wars.
Okay.
Go figure, a guy named PodVader likes Star Wars. And I've got a lot of problems when it comes to, prequels and some of these one-off movies like Solo, and where they fit in the actual storyline and how it's even possible for some of the things that they do to make that even happen. So timelines are things that drive me insane. So when you told me about the other one where, it's taken place 10 years after, I'm like, oh God, I can only imagine the flashbacks that they do to try and fill in. And Fear the Walking Dead right now has got a similar problem where they're dealing with, a jump forward in story and a flashback to a story that hasn't even happened, that we don't even know anything about yet. And we still have questions about, what happened where we left off the series last year. And they've got a big problem on that particular show when it comes to telling story. So,
I would advise staying away from the Star Wars books then, because right now they take place in between A New Hope and Empire, and they've been going on for I think 2 or 3 years. So there's a lot of story like they're trying to fit into that that time frame. Actually, they're just finally moving to the new Empire Strikes Back, I think at issue 50. But some of like the main Star Wars title, the Darth Vader title right now is taking place between episode 3 and A New Hope. But that's actually been kind of fun because it's kind of just Darth Vader going around and trying to hunt down the remainder of the Jedi that maybe made it through Order 66. And before that, they relaunched Darth Vader because that's what they do. The first rendition of Darth Vader was in between A New Hope and Empire. That was kind of telling the story of how Darth Vader found out that Luke Skywalker was who he was. But if you're a stickler to like wanting to know how they fit that all in, it will probably drive you crazy because it's like that's a lot of story to put in between two films that didn't seem like they were that far apart from one another. Yeah, I know. It's trust me, like the latest ones, the brand new ones. I mean, we're supposed to be led. We're supposed to be led to believe that. I think it's supposed to happen pretty much back to back. Like there's not supposed to be much time between Last Jedi and A Force Awakens, and I'm sort of like, how did the New Order, First Order, see, I even call them by the wrong name, get into power so quickly? Like just because they blew up a planet? No, come on. Yeah, well, that's where you'll get the extended universe, either comic or novel, to follow that in, right? I mean. Yeah, and that drives me crazy too. But I get it; it's the big corporate machine, Disney. That's what Disney does. Yeah, definitely. But all right. Well, anything else before we bring this episode to a close? No, I think we covered it all. I think I think what we've really discovered is that the comics back in the day are much better than the comics now. There's going to be one or two comics that are going to be enjoyable to read for sure. But if you're a young kid just getting into comics, you need to go back to the 90s, my friends. Some of the 90s, because some of the 90s right. is pretty bad. There was a very high and low when it came to that time frame for sure. But sure. I know we talked about on the beginning of the show, but if more people wanted to follow you and listen to what you put out, how would be the best way to do that? Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at @PodVader. That's an easy way to follow me. And my podcast is called Next Fan Up. It's available wherever great podcasts are heard. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, that's the same place. Stitcher, iHeartRadio. Great places to listen to podcasts if you're into the NFL, which I am. And we don't just talk Patriot stuff. We talk about other... Well, I can understand why you want to not talk about Patriot stuff right now. So it's though, I mean, it could be worse. I guess the big thing now is Tom Brady not showing up to OTAs or whatever. Though I guess he's there now. So. Yeah, he skipped the voluntary ones. He's at the mandatory ones. So I'm not that concerned. That's just the media trying to find something to talk about. Yeah, which is fine. But no, trust me, I'm one of those guys where if there's smoke, there's most likely fire. So there does seem to be a lot of smoke coming out of Foxborough these days. Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, yeah, well. There's been a lot of smoke for the Giants as well, unfortunately, in the wrong ways, especially with Odell Beckham. So, but I do want to thank you again for coming on and taking the time. I appreciate you doing that and finding room in your schedule. And remember, if anyone wanted to get in contact with this show, you can do so by following me on Twitter at MoverRevolt. Go to the geekcastradio.com or nerdly.co.uk. You can leave a comment on the episode post, or you can send an email to MoverRevolt@geekcastradio.com. But that'll be the end of this week's show. Remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for listening. She was just a kid. She left me at my grandma's house in 1976 already. But I had a teacher and I had a preacher. They'd buy me books, make sure my jacket was warm. Almost out of home, so close to family. But everywhere I turned, those kids would try to end me. I got beaten up pretty bad, left on the soccer field. I would transfer schools before my black eyes healed.